Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Hall 1 and the Penn State University MacAdmins Conference. My name is Tom Bridge. I want to start today's conversation with a quick flashback to last year's conference at MacAd in Brighton, England. Apple was on stage in May of 2023 and said that separating a managed key store from the user key store is a challenge on a deep technical level, and that while the use cases for that key store are certainly interesting, there are deeper architectural issues at play, and that this was a complicated subject. It was natural then to hear as an audience member, this isn't happening right now. And by this, I mean iCloud Keychain for managed Apple accounts. What was actually true is we put a lot of thought into this, so this is happening in exactly 3 weeks. So I felt really silly on the MacAdmins podcast that we hosted at the end of the week, and Charles and I were up there talking about it, and they're like, oh man, I guess we're not getting managed Apple iCloud keychains this year. This is a bummer, the whole 9 yards. And after WWDC, I may have gotten a few text messages that said, see? That was all they said, see. And so what I want you to be very cognizant of as we go into this conversation is that as an admin, it is your job to listen to what's being said out loud, but recognize that what you take away from a conversation may not be what was intended. So I ask you all to keep an open mind. And with that, I open up our conversation today, managed Apple IDs, threat or menace. But of course, that's not what this is anymore. Of course, managed Apple accounts are what we have today as of Worldwide Developers Conference 2024. So does that make them Moz and Paz? I mean, I was going to say the beautiful American Gothic gives us the imagery that we will now all possess instead of whatever was in our head before around maids. So you will hear me say managed Apple accounts all day today unless I start screwing up. So as we start to think about managed Apple IDs, we shouldn't start to think about them as threat or menace. We should ask this question instead, will I need a psychiatrist? And the answer is probably yes, but not for the reason you think. So the other question that you have to ask is, how much messing around is there going to be? I had originally put this in the Britishism, how much faffing about is there going to be? I wanted to change that for my appropriately American audience this time. But the name of this talk is actually Managed Apple Accounts, Federation, Challenges, and Opportunity. And with that, my name is Tom Bridge. I'm the Director of Product Management for Devices at JumpCloud. We're an MDM and an IDP. We are a dessert topping and a floor wax, but we are here to help your business handle and make work happen. So I want to talk about the agenda real quick before we get too far down the line. We're going to talk about what are managed Apple accounts. We are going to add a word at the end of that and say, what are managed Apple accounts for? And then we're going to talk about why you should federate authentication, today. And then you're going to ask questions like, who can I federate that identity to? Tom, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, there are a lot of good options here. When should you consider doing this? And the answer, of course, is now would be a really great time to start thinking about it because it's going to take you some time to accomplish. Last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about where all of this is going. So with that all said, I will ask you to silence your computers and your cell phones. We've got a rough ride talk here. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot to pay attention to. Now would be a really great time to close Slack and focus on the conversation at hand because there's a lot of moving parts in this one, and I don't want you to miss a thing. Lastly but not leastly, these sets of slides will be available at tombridge.com later today when I get back to a machine that has WordPress access. So with that all said, what's a managed Apple account? How do we know what this is? And I think that as an Apple admin, you've got to start thinking about this in terms of your own opportunities. You already probably have a managed Apple account if you have an Apple Business Manager account. It's no longer a managed Apple ID, it's a managed Apple account. I will say that one more time. But if we think about this from the perspective of it being a bucket of services and things that you do, Apple Business Manager is the subject nearest and dearest to your heart. And to your day-to-day operations. But it can also be an iCloud account that you sign into on your phone. It could be an iCloud account that you access directly on the web. We've done a lot with fun things with Notes collaboratively in managed Apple IDs after last year's announcement of additional services that can benefit from the iCloud sharing functionality that's associated with these managed Apple IDs. So there's a lot that you can do with managed Apple IDs, including use them for device enrollment. And so at JumpCloud, we offer the ability to manage individual personal devices. And so when I tell you that this is Tom Bridges' cell phone with Tom Bridges' operating system and apps on it, not JumpCloud's, I own this. Do you think for a moment, even though I love and deeply trust my admin, Ryan Bacon, do I trust him to manage my personal device? Absolutely not, because admins can wipe personal devices if they're enrolled as corporate devices. That's not okay. So what if there was another way to think about that, and that's user enrollment. And so to be able to put up a firewall between your personal applications, like the Sketch bookmark that we're all using this week, or our email, or our applications, we want to keep that wide and separate and fully segregated from the work that we do every day that is very, very important. I spend a lot of time in Jira and Confluence. Those apps are delivered by that user enrollment. They live in that work partition on my device, that APFS volume that is created by my user enrollment. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. This is a great reason to be considering managed Apple IDs for your organization so that you do not have to have the keys to all of your users' personal devices, because you should not have them. I say that lovingly and trustingly in that I trust and love all of you, but you shouldn't be able to wipe your people's devices unless they belong to the company, in which case you should. So, what can a managed Apple account do? It can sign into Apple services. It can, as of last year, anchor an iCloud keychain, including passkeys that can be part of that managed Apple IDs or managed Apple accounts keychain. It can support continuity features like handoff that we use every day now, especially if we've got an iPad in the mix and we want to use that as a display for our work device. If I have a managed Apple ID in both places, I can use the continuity features to make that a universal control situation, which is super awesome because a $269 iPad makes a really great mobile second screen that you don't have to pay a lot of money for, which is awesome. You can also use it to sign in to third-party services with Sign In with Apple. In addition, you can perform a user enrollment for bring your own device, iOS and iPadOS devices. You can also back up iOS and iPadOS devices up to the 5 gigabyte limit. And you can use iCloud Drive in a team formation with up to 5 gigabytes of data. You can also, as of last year, gate access to developer tools behind managed Apple IDs that belong to your organization, which is super great. Who here has developers? I see a lot of hands. We've all have to deal with these accounts. It would be rad if those accounts were company owned and controlled and subject to the control of your IDP. In addition, you can hold identities and cards in the wallet application. You can use, for example, Jamp's got a really great connection with HID, and you can have a company ID built into your Jamp environment that delivers out to managed Apple IDs and is held in the wallet application, so that anybody who wants to access their Office store, boops the sides of their phone twice, uses that to sign in, everybody goes home happy, at least most of the time if your building is more recent and has a newer reader and all of the other caveats that go with all of those things. Managed Apple accounts are super powerful in that they provide you the ability to have an organization-managed tool for providing both identity services, application services, and now access to your device management. So let's talk also about what's new in managed Apple accounts. Worldwide Developers Conference last month brought the goods and in fact made this talk a whole lot longer, which is really great for me because I was a little worried that I was going to have trouble filling out a full 75 minutes. So what are the changes that are available in managed Apple accounts that we just learned about? Okay, who here is logged into Apple Business Manager and realized that you can clear activation lock on a device? Thank you for the round of applause. Tell that to all of your Apple friends. They have done you a huge service for any organization that has access to Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. By the way, you will also see this referenced in the slides. I am a business guy, so I say Apple Business Manager a lot. Anytime I say Apple Business Manager, I mean Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager, and you'll see it represented in my slides as AXM. The X is just, I don't know, it could be a star, but AXM seems reasonable. We got a couple of new things that are going to be available to us at some point in the future related to domain capture, which will allow you to register your domain. And at the conclusion of registering your domain, you can decide whether or not new accounts can be created on your domain. New personal Apple accounts can be created on your domain. You don't have to set up federation to do this. That used to be required. So you will have the new option to capture your domain and say, this is mine now, send no more probes, land no more objects. This is the 2001 reference for you people under about 40. But in these cases, you can allow only managed Apple accounts to be created on your domain, and that means you, the admin, are in charge. In addition, there is also going to be an option to migrate existing personal Apple accounts to be managed Apple accounts. And this account transfer option was messaged with this individual slide that allows you two choices. You can keep it as a personal Apple ID and move its email address off of your domain, or you can convert it to be a managed application. And if you are thinking a lot like I am at this point, you are asking yourself one question. Thomas, how will this work? I don't know yet. We'll see you at Mac Sysadmin in October in lovely Gothenburg, Sweden, where I will be giving the next version of this talk. I have not learned Swedish yet, so if anybody's got some good advice, I'm happy to learn. So with that all said, we are excited to learn more about what the future of those migration processes are. I have some ideas, but I don't have any evidence to base them on yet. I look forward to robust documentation from Apple on what that will mean, as well as clear understanding of how that will affect your organization. If you haven't thought about this for your environment yet, now would be an amazing time. Who here is pretty sure that they have personal Apple IDs on their corporate domain? Oh God, that was way more hands than I expected. That was half the audience for the people at home. So I was going to say, imagine for a moment that that was your CEO or a similar founder level individual who has set up a personal Apple account on your domain. You may be correct in that it was best practice at a time. That time is past. And so now we are in the future and we get to deal with the sins of the father, so to speak. We will come back to that. No question. So I was going to say, let's save our questions for the end, and I will leave time for questions today. So what are managed Apple accounts for? We know what they are now. We know how they come to be. We know how this whole process goes. So what are these accounts for? So let's talk about things that you can do with a managed Apple account. You can do account-driven device enrollment, which is the standard, profile-based device enrollment type that is complete corporate manage of your iOS or macOS device, provided you don't need full supervision of the device. If you still need full supervision of the device, may I point you gently towards automated device enrollment. You can also do account-driven user enrollment. We're going to go into depth about these account-driven flows because I don't feel like they are properly understood by the community. And when we do understand where the future is, we can start skating there, which is really exciting. In addition, you can collaborate using iCloud with your company and with other people in your managed Apple domain, which is super exciting. In addition, you can power company identity and authentication with iCloud Keychain for your company. There are some caveats involved in all of this, and I'm going to gently gloss over them. Catch me in the hallway to learn about all the sharp edges. But I also want to point out here that unless you are an education account or you are using Apple Business Essentials, anybody in the room using Apple Business Essentials? Okay. Unless you are using an education account, you are limited to 5 gigabytes of storage per Apple ID, and there is no upgrade path. Mr. Cook, let me give you money. Please help me figure this out. I do not want to use Apple Business Essentials. I just want to make more iCloud storage exist. This would be an awesome feedback for everyone looking and has feedback open on their laptop. What, you don't have a feedback assistant open on your laptop all the time? Okay, fine. Put that a note for later. They did give it all to education, that's true. So I do want to talk about the account-driven enrollment types because this is super interesting. In account-driven user enrollment, it requires a managed Apple account. You cannot do an account-driven user enrollment without the account. It's in the name. This also requires what's called a well-known endpoint. We're going to talk about that in depth. This requires that you be able to create a folder at the root of your company's website and place a file in it. You would think that if I could describe it in 10 words or less, it would be easy. I regret to inform you it is not. This is more complicated a requirement than I would personally like, and I hope that it changes. There are other ways to accomplish the same task, But what this the purpose of this restriction is that you want to make sure PretendCo can make sure that only PretendCo Apple IDs can sign into this service. How do you figure out who PretendCo belongs to? So there are many ways that this could be accomplished. This is one of them, and this is the one that Apple has chosen for now. User enrollment is subject to limited commands and limited functionality. However, it's perfect for your bring your own device scenarios. Perfection, as a matter of fact. Account-driven device enrollment is very similar to profile-based device enrollment. If you've ever gone to Simple MDM or Jamf or any of the other MDMs that are out there, you get an MDM profile to download, you double-click on it, you type in an admin username and password, and poof, your device is managed. That is profile-based device management. This is the account-driven equivalent. And we'll talk a little bit more about the anatomy of that process in just a minute. So, account-driven enrollment is super unique because it allows you to have full data separation with separate APFS volumes for your personal stuff and your separate stuff. APFS, and I'm sure somebody's going to get the ding because I mentioned a file system, but it is an incredibly robust file system that allows you to create multiple volumes that are part of the same volume group that are intermingled, and so it's treated as one big volume. And Apple has done some incredible work in this regard to essentially say, here is the managed section of that hard drive. And both sides have opted in to that management, and either side can push the button and push the big red button, and the volume goes away, which is really exciting, especially for security people. When I told our CISO about this functionality, he was like, oh, that's cool. And when you impress your CISO, you've had a good day. So I recommend telling your CISO all about that particular functionality that's here. The important thing is that sign in and sign out gate the access to that APFS key. If I sign out of my managed Apple ID, I've signed out of management. The management volume goes away. Anything in the management volume also goes away. And it goes away in such a way that you don't have to worry about it later, because it's subject to all of Apple's encryption rules and routines. And so as a result, it's just like hitting the big red button on the erase this device. If you trust erase all contents and settings, you should trust the sign out options for user enrollment. There are some interesting limits for application management on user enrolled devices and on account-driven device enrollment, which is to say applications delivered over the MDM cannot overwrite existing versions of those applications. So if I have the Gmail app on my personal phone and my company uses Gmail for work, and I try to push down a managed copy of the Gmail application, that does not work. In fact, you get a very nice message that says, nuh-uh, no, not allowed, verboten. And essentially you have to go talk to the user and get them to delete it, and then you can push the application down. That is also true for account-driven device enrollment. So be aware that there are some limits that you need to be careful of. You need to be cognizant of these as you build a BYOD program. So let's walk through user enrollment. And I'm going to focus on account-driven user enrollment today, but a lot of the same functions exist for account-driven device enrollment. So this is the future for enrollment, so let's make sure we understand it. It has not been said that profile-based device enrollment is going anywhere. However, profile-based user enrollment is absent in the latest versions of macOS and iOS that will be out this fall. In fact, if you try, you get a very important pop-up that says profile-based user enrollment is not supported on this OS. So if you currently are doing profile-based user enrollment, I regret to inform you, you have some phone calls to make. But the future is actually better in a lot of ways, and I'm really excited about the possibilities of making this an easy experience for your end users. So we need to talk about the 4 stages of account-driven enrollment. This is the same whether you're doing user enrollment or device enrollment. The first step of this is we have 2 questions and 2 actions that happen as part of this. The first of these is a question. It's service discovery. Where do I go? The second of the question here is user enrollment. Who are you? The third thing, which is a task, is a session token, and it's here. Take this. You're going to need it later. The fourth thing is MDM enrollment, and that's the completion of the process. That's the delivery of the MDM enrollment profile, the installation of the MDM enrollment profile, and the management of the device, all in one fell swoop. So I do want to point you at Apple's incredibly excellent developer documentation for this next part. The user enrollment section of the device management page is really detailed and instructive, and it has really great graphics that I completely stole. So we are going to talk about what happens first. In this particular case, a user on their device signs in on the client, which is to say that they open up system settings on their Mac, or they open up the settings application on their iOS device, and they go to VPN and device management. Beginning with iOS 18, that is much closer to the Surface than it has been in previous operating systems, which is great. It makes it easier to find. Once you have done that, the client takes the email address that is included in the first step of this. So I put in tom@afcr.co.uk, and it looks up a value for the well-known for that domain. It goes to the MDM URL, and it makes a first enrollment attempt. And the whole system says, no. You'd think that any process that starts with no will eventually get to yes, and you are correct. But we start with a no. And that no is important because the no is, who are you and what are you here for? I don't trust you. The concepts of authorization and authentication are super important to our job, and they are separate from one another. Authentication is who you are. I am Tom Bridge, and I can prove it. Authorization comes down to, do you belong here? Should you be able to actually complete this process? It is a check against the rules of your organization as to whether or not you can complete that interaction. They are separate things. You're going to hear me call them auth-N and auth-Z because I like shortening things and I'm lazy. So be aware. So we're going to start with a managed Apple ID, tom.bridge@afcr.co.uk. I have a Jump Cloud tenant that is AFC Richmond themed. Yes, I'm that Ted Lasso nerd. No, I'm not sorry about it. Yes, I'll appear in public. What are you talking about? But I did, in fact, register this domain, and I do own it. So there you go. So the first thing that you do in those moments, the client does, is that it takes a look at this, and it says tom.bridge@afcr.co.uk. Step 2 is that it evaluates the domain that is here. And it says, cool, that's where I'm going to go look for the instructions on what to do next. And it's going to go to this longer URL that says afcr.co.uk/.well-known, because again, this is the well-known endpoint, com.apple.remote management. And more importantly than that, it's not just going to go to that URL. It's going to go into that URL and provide parameters that come along with it. It's going to tell the other end, the web service that it's trying to talk to, by the way, this is tom.bridge. Oh, I missed a slide where I was supposed to correct this. tom.bridge@afcr.co.uk, and they're coming from an iPhone. And so that information is super critical because it allows your web service to decide what gets served back. This is on, for the most part, your MDM to figure out on your behalf. Unless you are really, really clever and you want to write your own web service, and if you are, I want to talk to you afterwards. Jump Cloud is hiring. I'm just saying, good jobs, great benefits. You can work anywhere. Anyway, you will get a response back that looks like this. It is a JSON object. It is a set of servers. It is one server. You can return exactly one server in this case. You get a version of this that tells the operating system what to do next. Hey, by the way, this is a BYOD device, so we're going to do a user enrollment here. And here's the base URL. This base URL that is here is Jamf's pattern for this, by the way. And so you can see that it is service discovery enrollment /v1/user enroll. And so this is a user enrollment URL that is provided back to the device at that point. And it says, hey, by the way, you're going to go here when we get to this step. And in fact, it's going to go to that URL, and it's going to supply this XML file as a post request to that URL. That's going to say, hey, by the way, I'm in English. I'm an iPhone 10,2, and I'm on operating system version 19A240. It's going to supply all of this in that process. Now, I'm going to step back for a second. We're going to look at the device enrollment version of the same thing. You're just going to get a version in a base URL. It's a lot shorter. You can see that I'm using a made-up MDM string and not Jamf string in this case, mdm.afcr.co.uk/enroll/mdm. And in that case, it's going to send that same profile back to the MDM enrollment URL that takes you through that process. What happens next depends entirely on your mobile device manager and entirely on how you are deploying the software. So we're going to talk about the easy way first, and then we can talk about the hard way. There has to be an authentication during this process. The question is where it authenticates. Your MDM could choose to set up a basic WebAuth kind of situation, your standard username and password form, and essentially we get that WebAuth endpoint. The server supplies an authentication form. The user gets to see it and complete it. I'm Tom. My password is Purple Monkey Dishwasher 615, and then it posts that form back and gets an authentication result that is almost always going to be, sorry, 401 not authorized. Try again. You fat-fingered your password. That's just me typing on the little tiny iPhone keyboard. You're probably going to do better than I am in this regard. But when you succeed, you will get an authentication result. What happens next is that it makes the second authentication attempt. And it will get an enrollment profile this time. The device will then be prompted to authenticate to the Managed Apple account. They will enter their Managed Apple account credentials. The client on the device will then authenticate with Apple and say that the Managed Apple ID is okay. This is an unfederated case. This is a place where there is no identity provider, that you're doing standard manually created Managed Apple accounts. At the conclusion of that process, they'll get a thumbs up from Apple. Yes, you typed your password in right. And then they'll be prompted to sign into iCloud and iTunes. They will install the enrollment profile, and the device will be enrolled at that complete point. That's the easy way. There are more steps in the IDP way. In this particular case, going back to the beginning, we're going to do an authorization event here. And because it's because every Managed Apple ID is fully controlled by Apple on the back end, they know which IDP you're using. They know where to do the authentication and authorization transactions, and they're going to send you to the right place. And that device is going to be told, hey, by the way, we're going to do an OAuth 2 IDP connection, and we're going to get that authorization form. They're going to do that form. That's usually going to be like if you're doing it with Okta or Google Workspace or Azure or Jump Cloud, they're going to get that UI. They're going to sign in with their work account, their primary work account that's tied to their credentials. And that at the end of that process, they're going to get an authorization response. What happens next is that they get issued a token request. The client issues a token request and gets a token back. And that token's going to do the rest of the heavy lifting for us as we go forward. And then we go through this just like we used to, where we do the authentication of the Managed Apple ID, which can once again be a round trip to your IDP if you're federated. And then you're going to do the sign in with iCloud and iTunes, install that enrollment profile, and you're enrolled at the end of the day. This all takes, when it's done right, about 6.5 seconds. It's a lot of steps that get done in 6.5 seconds, but they get done and they get done right. And it's super important. So I do want to explain what user enrollment is for BYOD, and what you can do as an admin is drastically different than what you can do on company-owned devices. And it's also drastically awesome in a lot of ways. So managed apps on unmanaged devices is a really exciting concept, because what you can say is that I have a company-managed application that is part of your environment that is controlled by the management of that device, which is very limited in scope and shape. But it does mean that you're in full control of the storage for that application. And it lives in that user enrollment APFS volume that can be destroyed by either side at any time. User-enrolled MDM is privacy preserving without compromising your management structure. Both sides have to hold some trust in the other side, but they can do so without giving up their personal privacy, which is exciting. Enrollment gates your access, and it preserves that ownership. So I want you to all think for a second about a little bit of a curve. We have a curve here that's going to show us, I was going to say, I love Ryan Bacon. He's my IT admin. He's amazing. We've worked together for 3 years now, and he's incredible at his job. And his team that he has built is amazing, but I still don't want them to have full access to my device. I love and trust them. There's no way I'd ever do a corporate enrolled device on my personal device. Not happening. Sorry. I believe in my own personal privacy. There's a ton of information that flows over that MDM channel, which you might want, but you shouldn't have. So we're going to think about this in terms of a curve that starts with the people who will always comply on the left, and I think that's probably about 20% of your A student employees who are just going to do what you tell them, either because of apathy or because they trust you. On the right-hand side, you have the 20% who are never. They just aren't. They're just not going to do it. And it doesn't matter what you promise them. They're going to demand a supervised company phone. Won't. Buy them one. It's easier. In the middle, you have 60% of your audience that you have to convince, and that need to understand all of the things you can and can't do as admins with their device. And they're the ones that you have to convince about this next spot. So they're the maybes. And so if you want to go from a personally owned device to a personally owned but also company managed co-management situation, you have to convince them what's okay. This is not an easy job, and it's not low stakes. Sorry if you wanted easy solutions to this problem. There aren't any, because this is a human problem, not a technological one. The technological part helps, though, and this is where you get benefits. So, in a work and personal environment, I want us to think about the brick wall that exists between your personal applications and your work applications. On the left of this slide is what you know about your phone. You know its serial number. You know its MAC address for the Wi-Fi and for Bluetooth. You know its phone number. That is not my actual phone number. You can call, but nobody will answer, or somebody very confused will pick up. And you also have a series of apps that are on your device. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp, Hoovo, Airbnb, 1Password. You have apps on your phone. Who here doesn't have any apps on their phone? Crickets. We've all got apps. They're super useful. They're part of our lives now. They give us all sorts of structure that we can put in our day. So, in the end of this, on the bottom right, is what your MDM knows about that device. It gets an enrollment ID. Doesn't get the serial number of the device. Doesn't get more than just the model identifier of that device. Doesn't get your phone number, doesn't get your Bluetooth MAC, your Wi-Fi MAC address. Cannot be identified by anything other than its enrollment ID and the apps that are placed on that device by your MDM. That's all it knows. So here's what your MDM can do in user enrollment mode. It can keep your work apps separate, which is super important. You can set a 6-digit non-simple PIN. That's the only policy that you can set. By the way, if they have a watch paired, now their watch is set to 6-digit pins. So be aware of that. You're going to have to do some messaging on that. People might be upset about, if you typed 1008 and unlocked your watch, now you got to put 2 more digits on there. Sorry, friend. That's just how it goes. You can enforce no screenshots on the device. That was one that I did not think I was going to bristle against until I had to be subject to it for a weekend when I was cooking out on the grill and I was going to take a picture of the thermostat rating on the app that I'm using. I can't even do this in my apps. Oh, wow, that's a big... But it does close a loophole, which would say I can't export from my work apps, but I could still take a screenshot. Not anymore. You can turn that off if you want to. You can prevent the pasteboard to be used across the management boundary, which is to say you can prevent the copy and paste from a managed application into an unmanaged application or an unmanaged application into a managed application. They are separate. You can delete managed things at unenroll. So if you force the device to unenroll or the user unenrolls on their own, anything that is managed will be removed from the device. And last but not least, you can apply accounts in a managed container so that you can put system, email accounts, system calendar accounts, system contacts accounts, those can all sit in there. And they can be placed in that managed container and will be subject to the same rules as managed applications. Last but not least, on applications, you can send applications, but you cannot replace them on the device, and you can patch managed applications by sending them again. So you can keep the apps up to date for your end users in those cases. So this is the handy-dandy chart that is in Apple's documentation. If you're not familiar with the Apple Deployment Guide, get familiar with the Apple Deployment Guide. It's amazing. It's the Apple Platform Deployment resource is absolutely incredible, and it's available to you for $0, absolutely for free. Go and grab it. Look at it, bookmark it. It's available in a ton of languages and localizations. So be aware that that's there. So the next thing that I really want you to think about is a comm strategy for all of this. You have to be ready to talk to your coworkers about this. My colleague and I just got to give this same brief for all of JumpCloud. And it's our job to make people comfortable with this feature for our own use, because I want to be able to use managed applications on my personal device and log into Tableau, because that's a secure data resource for us and is only available via a mobile device trust. So you have to make people comfortable early, and you cannot screw up on this one. This one is so, so, so important. If people do not trust you, they will not trust you with their phone. They just won't. And then you have an entirely unmanaged plane with no application data that you have to deal with and control. It's a hard solution to crack, but doing so with honesty and integrity is so, so crucial. And honesty and integrity are things that you gather in pennies and spend in dollars as an organization. And you are really in trouble if your people don't trust you. So the other thing that is really important is that you have to be able to demonstrate what you can see, so they can see and believe. They have to be able to see the entire loop through the whole thing. And that means getting up on top of, up in front of the company and saying, here is Tom's phone, and here is everything I can see about Tom's phone. Do that with your devices so that they can understand and embrace that. You also have to clarify your Apple ID plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but you need to have a plan for managed Apple IDs in your company and getting to them. You also have to provide utility and usefulness. If what you are providing is not useful to them, start over. Because until such time as what you are doing is useful to them, they will treat you like damage and route around you. So you have to be able to provide utility. All right, so we're going to talk about claiming your domain, and I'm going to step you through the whole process of claiming a domain with my AFCR account. So getting Apple Business or School Manager set up properly is really, really important for your company. And so, for example, I have this domain section in the settings screen of Apple Business Manager. And up at the top, you can see that I've started by claiming this domain for afcr.co.uk. I have a username conflict. We'll talk more about that later. Don't obsess about that right now. We're going to walk you through the claim process first. So if I want to add a new domain, I click that Add a Domain button at the bottom, and I get this screen. And so, for example, I could claim tombridge.com that's available here. And what happens when you claim a domain is that you get this lovely little circular arrow button that says, this is in process. You have not completed your task, and you have to do something. So if I want to get this done, I have to verify that I own the domain. And that verification process can be done by exactly one Apple Business Manager account. So that if another company has already claimed your domain because they own your DNS and can do those other things, you're going to have a conversation with them. So if you have a parent company organization that you want to do this with, you're going to have to talk with your parent company about how they manage those domains. So be aware that that's a part of this process. And Apple does not insert themselves in domain disputes. So be aware you're on your own. You do not have Apple there to help you on this particular little piece. So if I click Verify, we're going to get a Steps to Verify section. And I just redid all of these slides literally last week because when I went and did it for the first time in a year, it was all different. So if you haven't seen these screens in a while and you think they look different, it's because they do. So you will see a domain information string here. It says Apple Domain Verification and a long random string. And it's got the little copy icon. So you click the copy icon at that point. And that's where I go to hover.com, which is where I manage tombridge.com's DNS. And I add a text record with the name of @ which just means the domain. And then I put the text in there that I got from Apple, and I click Add a DNS record. When I've done that, I go back into Apple again and verify that domain. And it takes like literally 3 minutes to do this whole process. It is not a lengthy process if you have access to DNS for your organization. If you have to file change control requests for DNS, if you have to do any of those things, plan on that taking just a little bit longer. But know that your organization's DNS is easy enough for you to manage in this case that is great. And so here at the end, you can tell that I've already got an IDP set up. I've got our JumpCloud IDP connector set up at this point. And at this point, I could conceivably go down the federation route, but we're not ready to do that yet. So an important question that we've gotten here, What was that about capturing accounts that you said like 35, 40 minutes ago? How's that going to work? How are we going to turn that on? And again, I point you to my favorite slide, which is how will this work? We don't know yet. See you at Max Sysadmin in October. I wanted answers on this one. They don't exist yet. They will exist soon from what I understand, and they will allow you to essentially, after you have verified the domain, say, stop the presses. I'm not going to federate yet. I'm not ready. But I don't want any more personal Apple accounts created on my domain just yet. Okay, so what about now? How does takeover work today? How does that process happen? And so what happens is when you go through the federation process, and when you set up an identity provider associated with your environment, that's kind of a stop sign moment. That's where you get to put up a stop sign and say, if I've set up federation or I'm setting up federation, we've got to stop creating accounts that exist out there, and those personal Apple accounts that have been created prior to now need a home. And that home is not at afcr.co.uk anymore. It can be anywhere. You can go anywhere you want. You can't stay here. If they ignore your response, if they ignore you for 60 days, they become iCloud accounts with a long random string. But they become iCloud.com accounts. So at the end of 60 days, you do still have some control over this process. But I'm going to say that magic number again, 60 days, because that's what it is today if you have a primary domain conflict. Okay, the user, in this case, my primary account, which was primary admin at afcr.co.uk, JumpCloud has claimed afcr.co.uk, and starting August 10th, you will no longer be able to use this account as the email address for your Apple ID. Please choose a different email address to continue using this Apple ID. This email will be sent to anyone with a personal Apple ID in your company. Who here wants to accidentally email their CEO? No? That's not the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning or wakes you up? Okay, fair, that's fair. I don't want to do that either. But in this case, as soon as you start that process and set up the identity provider, guess who gets emails? Everyone with that account. How many here think that you will know the email address of everyone you are about to email when you click that button? Right now, you're going to know that person. I see. Oh, Sean, you're cheating. Come on now. The answer for most folks is going to be, you don't know. And you won't know unless you're keeping a good control of all of your email. All right. So what do they see when they log in and get prompted to change everything? Well, they get this form here, which says an update is required. The Apple update required. This is the first thing they see when they log in on iCloud.com after that. And they get prompted to do that. So the domain has been claimed. They get told again, hey, by the way. And by the way, at the bottom it says, don't have an email address? Create an iCloud email at iCloud.com. And just by putting that email address in here, they will go through that process. It takes you through the continue spot, and they get a lovely confirmation here at the end, AFCR primary admin at iCloud.com. So this is what it looks like in my Gmail box for that account over the last couple months. When I set this up on June 11th, I got an email that happened then. I got another one a week later. I got another one a week later. I got another one a week later. And then at the end of the process, I got a, you've been updated and you were all set. So there are ways to, if you currently manage your email flow, to know everyone who got that email address. As a matter of fact, here's what it looks like. You may have seen the talk from Martin at Seek, Martin Piran, who gave a talk about this at XWorld in March, I believe, or no, May, I believe. This information is different than it was in May. This is what I got when I just did this. This came from Apple ID at apple.com. That's what's in the header, and the subject line is Update Apple ID. You, as the admin, will be able to go into your email system and say, show me all the emails that went out for Update Apple ID that came from this address. And you're going to be able to know who it is that you've actually got to go track down and say, hey, can you do the thing? I'd really like it if you did the thing. Can you do the thing now? Please, pretty please, can you do the thing? Because that's how much you're going to have to ask them to change the email address associated with their Apple account. So be ready for an aggressive comms plan on this, because you're going to need one. All right. It is now 2:15. We're all going to stand up. Everybody up. We've all been sitting for 45 minutes. Our brains have stopped working, or at least mine did anyway. All right. We're going to stretch our arms up over our head. All right. Is everybody feeling better now? Okay, that's fair. All right. We've taken our stretch break. All right. We're ready to go again. Take a deep swig of water. You can never be too hydrated. Oh. Cool. Now that I've gone through the process of starting this process, I can see that I have a username conflict. In this particular case, I can know that I have one username conflict because there was only one on the domain, and I have 36 days remaining because it's a 60-day timer, which tells you something, right? You're not going to do this fast, and in fact, you shouldn't. You should be very careful about claiming your domain. You should be very careful about federating it, and you should know what the effects of that process are. So be aware that you have a process that's going to take itself through this entire process. Once you have started on this, I couldn't get this to disconnect, and I think that's a bug, but I haven't been able to successfully disconnect this domain at this point, which is interesting. So we're going to talk about why you might want federation for Apple IDs in this case. Because we're also going to talk a little bit about OpenID Connect. We're going to talk about the system for cross-identity management. And we're going to talk about shared signals framework. These are all helpful things. So in the beginning, there was the password, and it was universally regarded as a complete mistake. Because you get a whole bunch of passwords like this up there. And you've got your Netflix password and your Paramount password and your Peacock password. Who here has a printed out list by the television now? I'm just old. Okay, fine. That's fair. These are actually all in our keychains. So I talked a little bit about authentication versus authorization. And it comes down to two questions. Who are you and do you belong here? So we're going to talk about authn first. Authn has multiple possible factors, the first of which is the password. Purple Monkey Dishwasher 615. It could also be a passkey, which is nice. Passkeys are much more secure, because they're actually baked into the secure enclave of whatever Apple device you've got, or the TPM of your Windows system, or the secure element of an Android device. It could be an identity certificate for which you hold the public and private key pair, as well as the certificate. Could be a PIN number. It could be a PIN, a personal identification number. It's not an ATM machine either. Could be a hardware token like a YubiKey or some other similar equivalent like a crypto card or a PIV card or a CAC card if you're spending time in the government service. Authorization is all about your group memberships in the identity management world. It's all about your application permissions. Does this user have a license for this software application? It's all about time of access evaluation. Dude, it is 4 a.m. What are you doing signing into email from Lithuania? That's not Tom. It could be contextual awareness. It could be AI. This is actually one thing that AI is actually really good at spotting, which is patterns of access. Does Tom often go to Lithuania at 4 a.m? No, he does not. That is not a trusted location or place for Tom. So, federation of your access is all about context and control. Most importantly, it's about centralizing those things in a common space. A single user and authentication source for all of your applications that groups those users and provides richer data for decision making. It allows or denies access based on rules such as who, what, where, when, or why. Actually, why is not really a good one in this case because it's computers and they won't know. But this is also subject to the use of external identity providers, and hopefully those other applications don't make you pay the SSO tax at the same time. As an IDP, I really hate the SSO tax because it's dumb and bad. As a product manager, I also understand it because I like money and I like having more of it. So we're stuck between a couple of different rocks and hard places. So when should you federate? The answer is right now. There's no reason not to do this. This is a straightforward resource for your organization. You should be doing this. Federating a domain for managed Apple ID keeps the control for the business. This allows you to essentially say, hey, I want to stop today this means this is how you stop the creation of further personal Apple accounts on your domain, is by federating authentication. That's the only way to do it today. You'll have other opportunities at some future time, but today, if you want to stem the tide, and you probably do, now would be a great time to set this up. So, benefits for you for federating is that account creation using your domain is limited to Apple Business Manager today. You have to go, if you don't federate, you have to create them one by one. Unless you're using Apple School Manager, I think you still have a CSV import via SFTP, but careful what you wish for on that one. It's a little bit funny. The other thing that you actually get to do here for federating is that you get to create accounts using Skim, which is automated and a process that you can control and understand entirely. You also, as the federating party, get to know who has a company domain Apple ID. Because if you don't federate, you don't know, and that is bad. Knowledge is power. G.I. Joe taught me all the good lessons. This also gives you the ability to do password resets through your help desk or your directory instead of your ABM admin. Who here has a separate identity team that you want to make this their problem? Ah, very nice, very good. You lucky people. There's other stuff that you have to deal with during federation, though, and it's important. Apple IDs created before you federate, have a time that they can hang around, 60 days for now. That's going to shorten to 30 at some point. They'll have to change their identity, but you still have no control over them. If they used company resources to pay for licenses of things, well, that's their license now, not yours. And because it's 60 days to complete, and because you don't have you have no way of knowing who will have these accounts before you start now. Reduce your knowledge deficit by starting now, because every day you wait is another Apple account that might get created. So that's no fun. All right, so federation timeline. You verify your domain via DNS record changes. You begin the federation process. That's where you evaluate and resolve your Apple ID conflicts. This takes up to 60 days to complete. This will go down to 30 days at some point in the future. I do not know when. So it could be 30 days from now, in which case you have the same timeline. It could be 90 days from now, which means you would save 30 days. So you don't know, you can't know, Apple won't tell us, so we have to make the best decision for our organization, which is start now. Then you finalize the federation of the authentication, and then you configure provisioning of the domains using Skim. And then you can begin your program, and you can go through that enrollment process for personal devices. So you might be asking, who can I federate to? Until January, the question was Google or Entra ID. Now, it is Google Entra or anyone who does OpenID Connect and Shared Signals Framework. So we need to talk about how federation works, which is to say, we need to talk about OpenID Connect. It is wild to me that in the year of our Lord 2024, that OpenID is entirely LiveJournal's fault. If I had to pick a social network from the early 2000s that was going to change the world, I would not have picked the emo kids at LiveJournal. I say that lovingly and begrudgingly because I was one. So it's all LiveJournal's fault. But what we get here out of this whole process is a virtuous cycle of managed Apple accounts, where user accounts are created at Apple by Skim, and they are validated by your directory using OpenID Connect. So I want you to understand the OpenID Connect cycle in a short diagram. Here on the left, we have a user who has a password and probably a multi-factor. Hopefully a multi-factor. It's 2024. In the middle, we have Apple Business Manager, who is the relying party, which is a technical jargon term for a person who is going to try and authenticate people. And on the right-hand side, we have a directory like JumpCloud. In this case, the user is going to go to the relying party and say, I want to log in. I'm tom.bridge@afcr.co.uk. They are going to send you to the directory in a new window, and the directory is going to send you a web URL to sign in at. They are going to sign in, hopefully correctly, and they may be prompted for multi-factor authentication. At the conclusion of that process, they will be provided an access token which will be used at the relying party. And that access token is going to help you. And so you'll notice I didn't use the word password anymore after the IDP transaction. It's because it's tokens instead. Tokens are just fancy passwords that are extra better and awesome. So they're not exactly passwords. On a successful authentication, you get a signed ID token, like that driver's license for Thomas sample card, this is the lovely sample image that's used by the District of Columbia DMV. And Thomas Alexander sample card, who lives on Commodore Joshua Barney Drive Northeast in Washington, which is actually not far from my house. An ID token is trusted so that you can know who they actually say, this is who you are, this is who they are, and I can prove it. Second, you get an access token, which is encrypted, and it's like a streetcar token. You throw it in the slot and you walk through the turnstile, and that lets you out. Now, OpenID tokens are kind of cool because on a successful authorization, you put in a token, pass through the turnstile, and then you pick up that token out of the other side because you now have a new authorization token that you can use the next time. Tokens are one use, and they're generally medium life, but they generate another token that can be used the next time. But they are one-use objects, but you just get another one when you use it, which is rad. I actually kind of dig that. It's super great. So this is what a token looks like. It's got an issuer, it's got a subscription, it's got an audience, which in this case is my federated Apple ID, because this is what we're presenting. We're presenting back to the IDP so that they know what the audience is. Hey, this is an Apple Business Manager token. It's got an expiry, and who can tell me when that expiry is? I'll give you a guess. That's the Unix timestamp. It was issued at a specific time. It belongs to a name. It's got a given name and a family name and a birthday in this case, because we're pretending it's a driver's license. And it's got an email account that goes with that. ID tokens also contain headers and cryptographic signatures that goes with this. Okay, so I realize that we've just been talking about OpenID Connect, and if you are having bad flashbacks to Kerberos TGTs, I am sorry. I recognize that we share this trauma together. I remember many an Open Directory burning down over bad DNS and having to be restored from the vendor backup and the long nights that causes. I still wake up screaming, but you don't have to do your own DNS for this, so it's not scary. That's on your IDP and that's on Apple. Everything's going to keep working just fine. You don't have to freak out. TGTs are actually pretty rad. Okay, Shared Signals Framework is still a draft specification of the OpenID group, but it's a great way to tell a relying party about the changes to your individual account. So think of it a little bit like a rail yard in this case. I have, over here on the left, I've got a user and their password. And I have Apple at the top, and I have the directory at the bottom. In this case, we could have a password change. The user could go to console.jumpcloud.com, and because of a 90-day password reset cycle, changed it from Purple Monkey Dishwasher 615 to Purple Monkey Dishwasher 616, because users don't ever do that, right? Anyway, because of Shared Signals Framework, the IDP could go to Apple and say, by the way, Thomas Sample Card changed his password just now. Do with that what you will. And Apple could make a decision to tell the user, hey, you need to sign in again. These Shared Signals Framework actions are super duper fast. They are about 3 seconds from password has been changed at IDP to iCloud account needs to be re-authenticated. Kind of cool. So the other thing that we could do is an admin could suspend a user. Thomas Sample Card. Why? Thomas Sample Card, I can't believe you're going to work for Google. We got to suspend your account. So we could tell Apple at that point, Thomas Sample Card has been suspended just now. The user could be prompted to sign in again on their device, and on failing to be able to do so, their account could be removed from the device. That's what the power of Shared Signals Framework does. There's also Skim that's about using and creating accounts. Skim also does some of these actions. User create, user delete, user suspend. Those are all Skim actions that you can do with managed Apple IDs as well. So what do you need to federate with OpenID Connect? You need a client secret for OpenID Connect from your IDP. You need a client identifier. You need an OpenID Connect well-known URL and the shared signals URL. Those everything in that column will be provided by your IDP. If you're using Okta today, I understand this is in private preview. If you want to use this with JumpCloud, come find me after. We've also got a private preview. And at the end of that process, you're going to put all those things into Apple Business Manager, and you're going to get back a redirect URL for Apple Business Manager that's going to be in your IDP. That's the trust that exists between IDP and Apple just to make the circle work. So what about provisioning? OpenID Connect without SCIM is a little bit like cookies without chocolate chips. You want them both. I want a cookie with a chocolate chip, and we're going to get them at break, right? So in this case, the organizational process is flipped. We're the relying party. Apple's the authority. And so in this particular case, a user is going to go to JumpCloud to sign in. They're going to be redirected to Apple Business Manager and complete that cycle. And at the conclusion of that process, they will have set up the SCIM connector. That's what you need to do in order to set up SCIM. You're going to get from your IDP a client secret and an identifier, and you're going to get from Apple from Apple Business Manager the redirect URL for ABM. And so here we're going to be at JumpCloud and set this up. I'm going to search for Apple Business Manager. I am going to select this one. It's set up for identity management and a URL bookmark. We're going to fill in here the bookmark URL, which is already preloaded for you. And then at the conclusion of this process, we're going to configure the application. Here we're going to say, all right, cool. We're going to do a manual identity management process to start. And we're going to get that callback URL from our documentation and put it in the Apple Business Manager environment, or in Apple Business Manager itself. We're going to get back that authorization callback URL, which is going to go into our IDP. At the conclusion of that process, we're going to have all those things set up. The authorization endpoint, token endpoint, revoke URL, and SCIM URL for Apple Business Manager and School Manager are set. So we just pre-filled that for you. We don't even make you copy that into your configuration on your IDP because we know better. We don't know you don't need it. In ABM, you're going to create a client secret that's good for 6, 9, or 12 months. Set this to the longest amount of time possible. Then mark your calendar 30 days ahead. Set an alert, set another alert, set an alarm, tell a friend, phone home, do all of those things, track this expiration because you're going to need it next time. In a year from now, when you remember, what did Tom say about this expiring? Right, 12 months from now. You're going to get a client secret back. It's going to create that secret. You're going to copy it and put it in a secure location like your password manager or on a Post-it note on your monitor. And then you're going to have to do a sign-in on Apple Business Manager. And you're going to be able to create this SCIM application, and it's going to tell you, hey, by the way, this application can view and manage all your users in Apple Business Manager. You got to allow it. Now you've got a client secret, and now you've got the entire process done. You can now map users and groups from your IDP to Apple, and they get created immediately. They get created with managed accounts, and because you've set up federation already, do they need a password? No, they already have one. They have their identity password and their primary identity credential. You can make that be subject to an MFA. You can make that be subject to an MFA and a hardware key. You could require a DNA sample if you've got a fast enough sampling machine. But these are things that you can actually do. So, a couple of takeaways on managed Apple accounts, and then we'll get to questions. This isn't something you do by accident or quickly. Be deliberate with it. Give it your focus and attention. You're going to need to have a comms plan for this because of those existing accounts. In addition, there are great reasons to deploy managed Apple IDs, managed Apple accounts. You're going to have great reasons to do this for BYO programs. There are a lot of really great things that you can do for that. When you do it, federate it with whatever you're using. If you don't have an IDP, come see me. We can talk. I won't even sell you JumpCloud the first time. Second time's on you. If you don't have a test domain, now's the time to make one. Domain name are $18 on hover.com right now for a .com. While we were in Joe Chilcote's talk, somebody flashed a URL up there, and I was like, oh, we better register that for Joe before somebody goes there, and somebody else has registered that. Now's the time to have a test domain, and they're easy to set up, they're easy to use with your federation. It's also important that you file feedback with Apple to make the use cases better. So if you've got a use case that you don't think is quite right yet, talk to your Apple people. Use Feedback Assistant. It's there for you. It's free. Awesome. Now, I'm going to leave this up on the screen, and I'm going to take Q&A. This is the QR code for feedback on this talk. I would love your feedback. It's how I learn. So either feedback or come see me in the hall after we're done. And with that, I'll open it up to questions, and I have a catch box here. Who can I throw this at? Woo.
Slippery thing. All right, so just to bring it in for those of us that are education, because there's a lot of us in the audience, this has been very business manager focused. There is one critical thing that did us some damage when they implemented it here without telling anyone. Have you heard anything along the lines of school manager Apple IDs all being treated as the user is under 18 and kneecapping out all of the nice features? Is there any mechanism coming that you're aware of? Have you heard anything about age determination? In our case, what happened is we had claimed our domain, we had not federated, and it took anything in that domain and banned it from developer, which was everyone.
Ouch.
And we were not told. And it is not documented. Our SE bailed us out with some inside information, but that's all we heard. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not, and I would be very interested in hearing more about it from you afterwards, so that if you have not yet filed feedback with Apple about that, I can imagine the feedback was, shall we say, pointed.
I yelled down the well as loud as I could.
Fantastic. I don't have any good answer for you. I see a Damien towards the back there. Oh.
Have you heard anything about the possibility of customizing the email that goes to account holders who have Apple IDs with your domain?
My understanding is there isn't any. If you would like to have that, file feedback.
Yeah.
Hey, there we go.
That'll be the answer for every question. File feedback. And no, I'm joking around, but
I would love for that to be
Okay.
customizable, because I do think that organizations ought to be able to own that. I don't see Apple, sending that on anything other than an Apple stationery, and it's possible it'll be like the organizational help URL that we get to specify in a device declaration for a software update. That's my guess on the most we'll get.
Thank you.
So, Marcus.
Skim, are you aware of the undocumented benefit of Skim with conflicts?
Yes, because I was going to say that is another great thing to call out. Skim, once you've set up a federated identity manager and you configure Skim, Skim will actually show you the domain conflicts that you have. And so setting up, getting those Skim logs directly out of Apple Business Manager is a good way to know where your conflicts might exist. And that's going to get you to, but you're going to have to be well down the path in order to get to that error, that spot. And it might actually be faster to just scrape your email.
It's also good to be able to see how many conflicts there are and that are still accounts.
Yes.
And realize how many are people who no longer work at the organization as well.
Yes, indeed.
Don't need to worry about.
A couple of spots earlier in the deck where we see some of the UI where you do get to know how many of those conflicts there are now. I'm going to go back a little bit further. But it's in the new UI. You can actually you get a count. You don't know who, but you can see that there is one username conflict in this case. Now, I was really hoping that by resolving the conflict, it would end the 60-day period, because I did the job, right? Do you think it did? It did not. Wah, 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 wah. All right, Sean, towards the back. Oh.
I'm going to make you flip through slides again.
Yes.
Where you were entering the client secret.
Yes.
Weird, fun thing about that. You can actually have 2 client secrets inside there.
Yes, you
and
can.
Don't worry about writing down that you're going to need to update that client secret, because Apple will repeatedly email you and annoy you and say, hey, by the way, you need to do this. However, once you update the client secret and you enter it into client secret number 2, do you think they're going to stop emailing you? No,
really?
Because you still have an invalid client secret that's about to expire, so you got to actually delete it first. So you enter the new one, then you delete the old one, and then they'll stop annoying you, and then you got 12 months from that point. The other cool thing you talked about was adding a test domain.
Yeah.
Subdomains work fine too. So if you make test.example.com, it works perfectly fine.
Cool.
Great idea. Then you don't have to pay an extra $10.
I see one behind you to your left.
Behind and to the left.
I just had a question I wanted to verify. So when you go to verify the domain, is that when those emails go out to anyone that has a personal
No.
email, or is it when you start federating?
It's when you start federating that get emailed. Verification is easy and safe, and you should do it.
Okay.
Verification is easy and safe, and you should do it. It's what comes after that you need to make sure that you have communicated ahead of time before you accidentally email the CEO.
Perfect.
All right.
It's funny, we're actually working on this now. So I just did this today.
How you feeling?
I'm feeling good, right?
right.
I mean, we have 17,000 employees. I think I got 2,700 conflicts, right? So I'm not like, oh my gosh, I'm worried, right? But I do know I'm at this point now where I'm like, I don't want to email the CEO. So we're kind of figuring out what our comms plan is going to be because we're trying to see first how many conflicted accounts we had. And we're sitting at this point of, okay, now we know. Do we want to let everybody know? Because we don't know what features we're going to give them yet with the managed Apple IDs, right? So we're still kind of figuring out what our plan with managed Apple IDs are going to be. But I needed to stop letting people create personal Apple IDs.
Absolutely. And that's
So
why
I
I'm
do
really
want to connect with the person that spoke on education because I just want to understand a little bit more. I do know once you, like if you did not federate, I guess I want to understand more about these underage accounts because I know that kind of happens if you don't have directory sync. Everybody comes in as a student, but federation kind of has to be turned on for that to happen. So not having federation, I just kind of want to understand that more too.
Yeah, stopping after you've verified and starting down the process and then stopping is totally normal. In fact, at JumpCloud, we started about 2 years ago and stopped. And so now we are revisiting that process now.
Yeah, so then to the question of how do you notify users, a button pops up that just says notify.
Yep.
And then that's when they'll start getting the email and it will pop up on their phones or MacBooks or iPads, whatever they're kind of in. The hard part is you don't know how to contact those users ahead of time.
Correct.
We are going to do the email, so I kind of know, like I worked with Apple and they were like, hey, you're going to get this emails from this account. So we're going to do the same thing, but it is hard to know ahead of time to tell these people, hey, this may pop up on your Mac
Yep.
also.
Oh, I was going to say, strong recommendation that when you do the notify, you scrape your email service so that you know exactly who those went to.
Yep. So yeah, we already have the rule set up. I just didn't
Yep.
turn it on yet. So it was good to see that you got it every week.
Yes.
Because I was kind of wondering, like, oh, did they get it one time? Is that it? So that was good information too.
Yep, fantastic. Rich is right behind you.
So this is not actually a question, this is a comment because we've gone through federation. There are maybe certain circumstances where you'll want to set up managed Apple IDs that are outside the scope of your federation. A good example is, say, a service Apple ID that is tied to your APNS certificates. When you have those set up, before you hit that federate button, you will want to make sure that the email address associated with that managed Apple ID is not within the scope of federation.
That is correct.
The reason for that is that the federation process, when it runs the first time, will now change your Apple ID to match the email address, and now you can't log in to that managed Apple ID because it's not actually tied to a person.
This is honestly a great use of that relay domain. That's a service domain that's part that you can essentially set up at that point. Move your break glass accounts there where they won't be subject to federation under any circumstances. And then you can make sure that those are set up with 2SV to a phone number that you control.
Yeah, I had a fun week of panic because of our APNS managed Apple IDs.
Good times, Jelly Donuts, right behind you. And we got
Thank you.
2 minutes. I'll take 2 more and then we can talk more in the hall.
All right, going back to the person that asked about the education, he mentioned something that I think may have went unnoticed, but so I work for Penn State. We give out emails to anybody, any student or any worker that comes here who may have created accounts and then have left the university. What do we do with those conflicts when they pop up? Because we have no way of contacting them or getting rid of those
Yep.
personal Apple accounts.
And the answer is you wait until the end of the federation period and they get reassigned to be an iCloud account.
Okay, so then we just don't care.
And then they're not your problem anymore. All right. We got time for one more question.
So I come from a very large university that does the same thing, that emails to everybody, have fun, and then you get them in perpetuity. So I'm wondering, is there any issues at scale doing this? Has that come up at all? Like if you have 10,000 conflicts, is that
I mean, you
problem.
just have to resolve them. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Or 60 days at the end, they will revert to being iCloud accounts. So it's all about resolution at that point and getting to the resolution. So, thank you for your questions. Thank you so much for your attention.